I wanted to go to sea. It was a way of life and something that we were all intimately familiar with, and something that kids my age at that time would do.
Our relatives tie us to our history, a fact which highlights the importance of preserving their memories. Hello and welcome. My name's Alan Berg. Have you ever had one of those moments when, during a discussion with an older family member, you were surprised by something they'd experienced or by something they knew about you that you didn't know? Well, that underscores the value of capturing this oral history on tape. Today, we're going to learn the art of interviewing, how to organize the questions, how to encourage someone to open up, and just as important, how to create a pleasing environment in which to conduct the interview. Our project will involve interviewing retired college professor Kjell Johansen about his childhood. He grew up during World War II, and his boyhood home was occupied by German troops for 5 years. To help us, we've enlisted photographer Matt Franklin, who regularly works for national television news magazines. He'll share techniques that you can easily use when you turn on your camera. The single most important factor in the interview we're about to conduct is the setting. Regardless of how well crafted the questions are that we ask, if the lighting's off, or if the sound is compromised, or if the interview is poorly framed in the camera, then that is what will attract the viewer's attention, as opposed to what the subject actually has to say. If it's a nice day, the temptation might be to conduct the interview outside. Although this can result in a wonderful looking set, there are all sorts of potential audio problems. We opted for a more controlled setting indoors.
I'm looking for a space that I can make adaptable to my needs.
After a quick walkthrough, Matt decided to interview Kjell in the dining room.
The nice kind of bricky rose-colored walls, that's easy to manage with the light on his face compared to the wall. It's easy to keep him standing out instead of against a bright white wall.
Matt created an intimate setting for the interview by moving everything except 2 chairs into an adjacent room.
It's a deep space with some pictures over the right shoulder. The person we're interviewing is a family member, and I thought that the pictures in the background made sense.
Matt also liked the dining room because it only had one window, which allowed him to control the amount of light on Kjell's face.
We used the window for our lighting source. We're able to adjust the curtains, etc., to get a nice even light across Kjell's face.
Matt placed Kjell's chair in the middle of the room, about 6 feet from the wall. This provided the depth of field. As a way of illustrating its importance, take a look at this shot, where Kjell's sitting right next to the fireplace. You can see how the background overwhelms the subject. The type of chair chosen for the interview also will make a difference. People tend to relax and slump back into a comfortable chair, and the resulting picture makes it look as if they're being swallowed by the cushions. Couches tend to have the same effect. The bottom line, we want Kjell alert and upright. Finally, note how the light that spills in from the windows affects the way Kjell looks. This underscores the importance of placing your subject so they face the light. If it's behind them, they'll turn into a silhouette.
We have him looking straight into this one window. We have light coming to his face. We don't have it coming from the side or the back. We're using this window to illuminate his face, not the side of him, not the back of him. If you're going to be in a room, you want your subject looking at the window. As far as what kind of chair you're going to use for an interview, we're looking for something that's potentially the most uncomfortable thing. We're looking for maybe like a wooden kitchen chair with a low back, a hard seat, and no wheels. Doesn't spring, doesn't recline, doesn't do anything. Just basically a stool, maybe with a back on it.
There's one other important consideration to take into account when choosing a chair.
The city limits were not as far out as they are now.
As you can see, he naturally began to shift around, which created a distraction. The problem was compounded by the chair's squeaky springs.
We're probably going to sit down and talk to this person for, possibly up to an hour, and people will start to fidget. And if you give them the least opportunity to fidget or move, that's good.
When conducting a lengthy interview, it's best to enlist someone to operate the camera so that you can fully concentrate on what the subject has to say. This also allows your subject to look at you as opposed to the camera. It makes a big difference. Just listen as Shell tries to talk directly to the lens.
From the time of the early Middle Ages. And
the pauses and hem-haws underscore how unnatural it is for most people to look directly into a camera.
You feel sort of silly talking to a camera, frankly. And what I maybe could envision in my mind is that an audience that will see what is now rolling into the camera. And I feel kind of silly. I would rather talk to a person that I can look at.
In addition to putting your subject at ease, a separate camera operator efficiently divides the labor. Matt can watch the interview framing and monitor how much tape is left, which allows me to pay attention to what Shell is saying. Matt also will monitor the audio. Before we actually begin the interview, we need to spend a minute or two talking about sound. After all, we don't want to end up with something that's hard to understand. Although our consumer model digital video camera has a built-in microphone, it isn't really ideal for an interview. Just listen to this clip.
The whole crew came on board in Norway, and it consisted of about 100 Irishmen.
As you can hear, there's a tinny, slightly hollow quality to the sound, and there's also a background hiss created by the distance between the camera and our interview subject. By comparison, when we place a lavalier microphone on our subject, his voice becomes full and resonant.
The whole crew came on board in Norway.
This gives us a soundtrack quality recording.
Where we want to place the mic is as close as we can get it to the person's mouth on the center of the frame.
A good lavalier or lapel microphone will cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $250. It's money well spent if you're serious about making quality videos.
It's going to free the hands of everybody involved. It clips right on a person's shirt. The interviewer does not have to hold the mic out for an extended period of time. We just put the mic on, it's as close as it can be, and you pretty much just, you have somebody monitor some headphones and you forget about it.
Matt clapped the microphone to Shell's shirt between the second and third button.
If you were to hide a mic underneath a tie or underneath a necklace and potentially jingle, it's going to rub, sound a little bit like this. You want to make sure that the mic is in a place where nothing's going to rub against it.
The placement and use of a lavalier microphone will help overcome the limits of the camera's built-in microphone.
Proximity is the big advantage when using the lavalier compared to the mic on the camera. The mic on the camera is going to be 5 to 6 feet away, and that's going to suck in pretty much anything it could possibly hear. Your fan, your heater, your refrigerator. The person you're talking to is going to start competing with all the noises that are going around the rest of the world. When we have the mic real close to the interview subject, it's going to be dominated by my voice.
His next step was to bridge the gap between the microphone's professional connection and the camera's consumer connection. To do that, Matt attached an adapter to the microphone. He then used a second adapter to allow him to keep the stereo quality audio. We have more information about the connections Matt used on our website, DIYnetwork.com.
I spent less than $40.
Once Matt connected the adapter, he taped the point of the connection to his tripod leg. This ensures it won't wiggle loose during the interview. He'll monitor audio levels through a set of headphones that are plugged into the camera. We've literally set our stage and everything's ready for taping, but we've also done quite a bit of preparation prior to today for the interview itself. When we come back, we'll highlight the importance of research and discuss the art of crafting a question, how to draw out that treasured memory. Today, we're learning how to record an on-camera interview. And during this half hour, we're going to capture Norwegian immigrant Shell Johansen's memories of his boyhood home. For today's project, we've already decided to use a lavalier microphone for the interview to ensure we capture good quality sound. We've decided to conduct the interview in our living room so we can control the lighting and avoid outside noise. Shell will be sitting in a sturdy kitchen chair that does not rock or swivel. We've enlisted a photographer to serve as a camera operator so I can concentrate fully on my conversation with Shell. We should spend a minute or two discussing the interview preparation. It's important to know what you want to ask before you begin taping. It will help you fine-tune your questions, which will save battery power and will elicit better responses. For example, prior to our interview, I asked Shell if he'd kept a diary or had written anything previously about his childhood. It turns out he'd given a couple of talks to local civic groups. I read through them, highlighted the points I wanted to cover in the interview, and listed them in a notebook. Then I went on the internet and spent some time looking up information about Norway, briefing myself on its history and geography, paying special attention to what I could find about World War II, since German troops had occupied Shell's hometown for 5 years during his childhood. Preparation is important because it signals to the person you're interviewing that you're truly interested in their story. They're more likely to open up because they're flattered that you've invested time trying to learn about their world. Finally, I looked through the photos Shell had from his childhood. I wanted to ask about these so I could use his answers as a narrative for the pictures. To get good anecdotes, it's important to pursue the story behind the snapshot. Anyone, for example, can see this as a picnic with some of Shell's relatives. But look what happens when we ask about the sheer number of pictures we found that featured such settings.
I look at the pictures from my life when I lived there and so on. I realized that we spent an inordinate amount of time outdoors. We have long winters and short summers, and we have this inordinate attachment to nature and need to be out in it.
An interviewer, in essence, is facilitating the telling of a story. So while it's important to find out who is in the picture, it's more compelling to hear something specific and descriptive about their customs or their life. That provides a texture and richness that moves beyond the image. I also want to cover a few basic points that will help you conduct an interview that's both comfortable for your subject and informative for your future audience. First, maintain eye contact with the person you're interviewing. It signals them that you're listening to what they have to say. Second, don't be tied down by your list of questions. Improvise. If you hear something that merits elaboration, then follow up with a question that encourages a more definitive response. Third, understand that silence can be your ally. People naturally want to fill the gaps when there's a pause. Finally, this isn't live television. Don't be afraid to stop the interview if it isn't working and explain to your subject what you're trying to get them to discuss. We have the raw materials from which we'll craft our story, but before we leave the subject of how to conduct an interview, I want to relay one other technique that's an old standby for professional journalists. That's next, right after this break. We've completed our interview and covered every subject that we'd listed in our timeline. But before we stop taping, let's employ one of the most effective tools of the trade for professional journalists, the show and tell. This is a separate, less formal interview where you ask your subject to show you some of what they covered in the questions and answers.
And I remembered, vividly then how often we had played this particular game.
We asked Shell to show us a childhood game he had played with his aunts during World War II. He described recently reopening the box and discovering his aunt's armband and the passbook she had to carry during the Nazi occupation of Norway.
It's an ID, is what it is, an ID.
The story awakened other wartime memories.
We had paper clips. A paper clip in the lapel was a sign of defiance. Because a paperclip meant that you could hold things together, and for some reason it meant unity.
It's doubtful these would have come through in a more formal setting, yet they provide a level of detail and intimacy that will greatly enrich our final video.
I remember those things.
You might have noticed that we had several different angles of Shell showing us the game and the wartime documents. To achieve this, we asked him to repeat the explanation. The second time through, Matt framed it differently, making sure he captured close-ups. These shots, called cutaways, allow us to cut away from Shell's face to other angles of the game and the documents to give the video a more descriptive and interactive feel. So to quickly review, first, move your interview subject into a setting where they'll have something to illustrate the story they're about to tell. Then get them to go through the story at least twice. Concentrate on tight shots a second time through. Finally, don't ask too many questions during the less formal interview. You want them to feel natural, as if they're talking with a friend. The more you interrupt, the more they're reminded of the camera's presence. So with that, we completed our taping with Shell. But before we turned off the camera, I wanted to record some of the pictures that I'll use in our final video. When we come back, we'll learn how to devise a makeshift easel for videotaping photographs.
It was a way of life and something that we were all intimately familiar with. I wanted to go to sea.
We're well on our way to crafting a quality video that will entertain and also serve as an important addition to the family archive. Before we begin editing, though, let's learn how to efficiently organize our footage and how to easily shoot old photographs. These techniques will help you produce a home movie that will be the envy of the family. Exactly what you choose to do and how long you choose to make the video is part of the fun of creating something. That being said, the longer it is, the more pressure you'll have to make sure it stays interesting. So if you don't have the pictures to sustain the story visually, then whittle it down. We first need to see what we have to work with. I try to review the footage fairly soon after the taping while I can still remember what we covered. This allows me to fast forward through the portions of the tape I know I won't use. As I go through the tape, I make notes about especially creative shots or powerful quotes. At several different points, I actually completely transcribe the interview so I know exactly what I have. This will help when it's time to write our script. We do know that we're going to rely heavily on Shell's collection of photographs, so Matt decided to go ahead and capture some of them on tape. He brought back in the dining room table and then used a clock as a makeshift easel. He tilted the clock back slightly and rested it on a tape case so that it would point the picture more towards the camera and reduce glare. Then he framed the picture so it filled the screen and hit record. He did not attempt to zoom in or pan across the picture because it's difficult to execute such detailed movements with consumer-oriented equipment. Instead, Matt taped each picture for about 20 seconds. After he hit record, he released his grip on the camera so it wouldn't shake.
As you're rolling, just keeping your hands off the camera is going to prevent motion. That's a distraction. We're not supposed to be paying attention to the camera at all. We're supposed to be paying attention to the subject. And if the camera gets knocked or I hit a button and the camera moves, then we're paying attention. I say somebody touched the camera. Then we're paying the attention's come off the subject and now it's on the camera. We don't want that. Set a shot, frame it, roll it, and give it the least opportunity to get bumped or moved as you can. I don't think you can get away with touching a button or adjusting a viewfinder without seeing the motion. It's pretty sensitive and you're best just not touching it.
For our taping, Matt used a camera tripod that cost about $200. But there's a way around this expense when the budget's tight.
Well, with making a tripod, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tripod. We're looking for something connected to the ground that doesn't move that we can sit a camera on.
Matt illustrated by stacking several books.
If we stack books up to somebody's, say, neck level on top of a table, and that works and it's not going to move, that's fine.
Then he put a hand towel on top of the books to help steady the camera.
Something soft like a towel folded up a couple times, you can rock the camera back and forth or tilt it up and down just a little bit.
Again, once he hits record, he lets go of the camera so it won't pick up his body movements. Let's talk briefly about the pictures that were too small to effectively videotape. We're going to scan these images into our computer. There's a more detailed explanation of scanning on our website, but let's spend a moment covering the basics. We're going to use a standard flatbed scanner, which costs around $100. Before we begin, we'll clean the glass to ensure lint and dust won't compromise the quality. To load our pictures into the computer, we'll place them face down. Since our pictures have a straight edge, we'll align them with the top of the glass, and we'll be careful when we close the lid to not allow the picture to move. Once the picture's positioned, we'll follow our photo editing software instructions and transfer the images into the computer. You can learn more about scanning on our website, DIYnetwork.com. You can also review the rest of the shows in our home movie series, one of which provides details on how to edit the footage we just collected. So take a few minutes to visit the site and explore the wide-ranging world of DIY. That's all for today. Join us again as we explore the powerful new tools for storytelling that the digital revolution has put at our fingertips. I'm Alan Berg. See you next time.